Welcome to Business in Heels podcast, the podcast that inspires and educates women in business globally to succeed. Now over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode where we are speaking to four of the wonderful authors who have contributed to the book Dare to Rise, their stories of courage from 8 remarkable women. And of course, we're excited to speak with them today. Yesterday we did part 1, today is part 2. So if you haven't seen the previous interview, please go and check that out because there's some wonderful insights from those authors. And today the authors are going to be sharing some of their authentic stories of healing, of courage, to remind all of us that we are not alone and that our struggles are just part of the larger human experience. And so it is such a privilege that they took time out of their day to come and join us to share a little bit each about their chapters. So Stephanie, let's start with you. Share a little bit about what you're doing today, because it's always nice to get some context about the work you're involved in and what you're doing. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Yes, good afternoon to everyone in Australia. And it's actually 12 o'clock now here in Malaysia, 12 in the noon. So good afternoon. So my name is Stephanie Lee. It's a privilege for me to be here today to speak to you. Well, my journey has been an incredible one because I left the corporate world and now doing my own business together with my husband. We are owners of a business where we supply services to the oil and gas industry in Malaysia. So my corporate life has been, 26 years. COVID was the catalyst for the change because I decided that I need more time with my family, and spending that time, given, the background that I have, I can bring it to my own business. That's how a bit about myself. So I started the chapter on embracing change in the new city, which is the inspiration really came from my own experiences during my corporate life, and also a conversation with a friend. You see, moving to a new place, whether it's across the state or another country, is always a journey filled with both equal parts of excitement and apprehension. I have gone through this 3 times during my corporate life, and each move brings its own challenges and lessons. It's also because of, when we are in different stages of our life, challenges we feel are very different, so they are unique. So the chapter was sparked by this conversation with a friend who has relocated to Boston 10 years ago during her 40s. So over coffee one day, she shared her story of starting over, the highs, the lows, and her realization. She wished she has been braver earlier in her life when it comes to relocation. She reflected on how, hesitation, waiting to take that leap meant missed opportunity most of the time. And, once time has gone, you can't reclaim them. So her word actually resonated very well with me. It makes me reflect on my own relocation and my own journey, the hesitation, the discovery, and the courage it took me to face the unknown. I realized her story, like mine, echo the experience of many others who has gone through the same path, of starting over in a new city. So writing this chapter was my way of sharing these reflections and my lessons. It is for anyone, standing at the crossroad of change, feeling both, drawn by the unknown and also feeling, probably held back by the fear. So my hope is to remind that while, change is daunting, it is also the key to growth and many opportunities, just like mine, I am very privileged to have gone through that and experienced that.
Yes, I love how you've put that together so succinctly, Stephanie. And if I recall correctly, you said you've moved about 3 times throughout your career and through your life. I wonder, as you now have that chapter and you've been able to read it yourself through writing it, is it words that you wish you had have read perhaps in the very first change that you have had to experience, because you may have looked very differently at that first change experience. So do you wish it was something that you would have had access to many years ago when you made that first change?
Yes, thanks for that question. Excellent. In fact, that's the whole reason I wrote that. Because, during my time, I started moving from my hometown, which is in Ipoh, in Malaysia. It's one of a town, in a city, actually, it's not a town. And I moved to Singapore, and then eventually I moved to Kuala Lumpur. And also my last move was actually Hong Kong before I came back to Malaysia. So I wish, I had that, someone has guided me that, what to anticipate. And I hope by, writing this story about my lessons, really for people who are, sitting at a crossroad of, wondering should they do it or should not, I think it will help them, give them some perspective of, what to expect and what they can actually take up from there.
Yes. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was that through speaking to one of your connections, you were able to hear her story too. And I know, and I'll just give a little hint, I wanted to identify one of the pieces that you wrote in your notes was the fact that building connections in that new town or the new place that you were at was something that you were challenged by. Someone else might be experiencing that too. How important is it for anybody who has or is at the precipice of making quite a big change, whether it be country, whether it be company, whatever situation of change? How important is it for you, or was it for you, to surround yourself, to build new connections so that you didn't feel like you were on your own? How important was that for you?
Oh, it's really important because it's actually, because once, imagine if you're going to a new place, right? And it's very foreign to you, be it language, be it culture and all that. And you need to start learning to adapt to that and feel at home. And in order to feel at home, you actually need to build, a relationship or friendship, because that connects you with, the presence, the culture. You start to learn new things. You learn to explore new, probably food. It's very different. And by connecting with people, you feel you're not alone, and away from your family and all that, right? For me, my last journey when I moved to Hong Kong, I was alone. I went there by myself. Imagine that, when you're alone and having to, the language is different. Although we all speak English there because it's business language, but imagine that, most of the culture is in Cantonese. So a lot of this, you start to have to relate, start to learn new languages, all that. And by connecting with people and them sharing, the locals sharing with you, you adapt quicker. So that's very important to me, connections.
Yes. And I think too, what we mentioned in the introduction, and yesterday the other two authors expressed this too, and the book itself, that so often we do feel like we're on our own, but realizing that it's not just us that is experience it. In your case, moving to different countries, different culture, different language, others have experienced that too, and we can learn from your experience and to make that transition far more far easier, but recognizing that we have the courage and the ability to adapt to change. And so what would be one brief last insight or words of encouragement that you would share for someone, Stephanie, that may be going through some significant similar change at the beginning of this year? What would be one last thing that you would like to say to her if she is watching today?
Ultimately, I want to share is that when you embrace the unknown, right, regardless whether it's moving to different cities or different places, once you embrace the unknown with through change, for example, what seems to be very daunting can actually turn into a life changing experience, like in my case, right? It's something I can bring, to and be very proud about. I actually did it, and sharing that, be able to share that experience with others.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure you have really inspired and encouraged others to embrace that uncertainty. Judith, let's move on to you. Share a little bit about what you're doing now, and then we can dive into your chapter title and what inspired you to write it.
What I'm doing today is it's a bit like those acrobats with plates on the end of sticks. I'm a family lawyer and a mediator and a parenting coordinator, and I've been doing that for nearly 27 years. And today, I think everyone knows that I'm trying to get to Melbourne to my cousin's wedding for the weekend. So they've all come out of the woodwork today, and they're all demanding things. And I've got matters in court next week, and it's just everything's happening all at once, and I'm having to keep changing gears. So it's a bit of a stressful day today, so I'm very glad to be here and out of that for a while.
Oh, good. That often happens, doesn't it? When you think, oh, well, I can do this, then all of a sudden, lots of other things said, no, we want you to give us your attention. Yeah. So your chapter, I hope I pronounce this correctly. Kintsugi?
Kintsugi.
Is that Kintsugi? Share with us, what does that mean and what inspired you to write your chapter?
Okay. So Kintsugi is a Japanese name for broken pottery that is very skillfully put back together. Now, we might do it with super glue, and you can always see that looks ugly. You never keep that. Don't think anyone would. But with Kintsugi, what they do is they put the broken pieces of pottery back together with precious metals, and they turn it into a work of art. So the vessel is restored, if you like, reborn, and given a new purpose and made beautiful again. And I guess looking back on some of the things that have happened in my adult life, and in particular the story that I chose to share of our then toddler son's cancer journey, I felt that we were a bit of Kintsugi, our family, because we started out, you're having a family, isn't this great? You've got this beautiful, healthy child, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong that you could not have foreseen. It's never happened to anyone in your family before, as it did with us, with our son. And you go down this deep, dark hole and everything changes. And it's about going down that hole, feeling the fear, but keeping going and seeing what beauty comes out of it at the end.
Yes, beautiful. And so as someone is reading the chapter and the insights that you've shared through your journey, what would be some of the things you would hope she and her husband, if it's a similar experience to yours, would learn, would take away from reading your chapter?
That ill health in a child isn't necessarily a death sentence, and it's not the end of the world as you know it. I think I coined the phrase 20-something years ago of our family having a new normal. So whereas your normal might have been child born, goes to daycare, goes to preschool, goes to school, ours had this big interruption in it. And even when you work through all of that and get it back on track, it continues to impact moving forward, but not necessarily in a bad way. And I think I still see a lot of the cancer mums and dads that we went through the journey with. I had dinner with one a couple of weeks ago. And what strikes me is those of us who looked for the positive, who I learned not to worry or panic about something until I was given evidence that I needed to. So, and I think that's a skill that I try and give my clients when they're going through the stress of divorce and trying to transition children is don't necessarily listen to the noise that's going on over here or what Google is telling you. Base it on fact and ask questions, and don't start to panic and get upset about it until you need there's that. And even then, if you do get the worst of news as we did, let's look at what the options are. Let's try and filter this new reality through some factual fishing nets, if you like, to work out how to swim through them and come out the other end.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, obviously being able to reflect on that and looking back on that, what's so important for parents, as you said, not to preempt something, because you could spend 24 hours a day worrying about things that may never happen. And that takes up a lot of energy and time and really impacts your health. So I wonder if someone is listening today that may be at the precipice, just starting that journey, what were some of the things that you can now look back on that enabled you to make sure that you were looking after yourself? Because obviously you've got this beautiful child who you're wanting to care for and give the best care to. But so often as parents, irrespective of whether your child is going through something that's similar to what yours was, we tend to wear ourselves out, think of ourselves last. So what were some of the things maybe that you can share that would ensure that you were always at your best, whatever that might have been? Of course, obviously you are worrying. Were there some things that you could share that could be helpful for someone?
I think try and take advantage of, make inquiries of what are the other support services that are available to you. My husband, for example, said to me one day, if that social worker comes near me one more time, I think I'm going to do something I'm going to regret, because he found it very hard to accept the help that was being offered. So you sort of work out those dynamics and steer yourself off, and you have to divide up the tasks, if there's two of you handling this, into what you can both cope with and be good at. Stephen was really, really good at retaining all of the information from the doctors. He could tell you what size tube should go onto Connor's port device. And he actually caught a staff member one day trying to do the wrong thing in the procedure and corrected them. So I'm not good at that stuff, but he was. So you try and accept the help, you listen to everything, and talk to people, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I remember Dr. Heather Tapp, the first thing she said to me after the diagnosis was, you two have to become your son's advocate, because he couldn't talk. He had an intubation tube down his throat and was using a message board to communicate. She said, you two have to do the talking for him and advocate for him. And that's what we did. And we were lucky. I mean, I was in and still am in, a really loving and stable relationship. So we were able to do that. But you've really got to pull together. And when I realised one day that my husband was really at his wit's end, I just left work, because I was the one who had to keep working, because somebody's got to pay the bills. And I went back to the hospital, and I just said to him, hey, can you go out to Centrelink at Norwood, and can you work out this, and this? Because that was stuff he was good at. He'd just had enough of being in that hospital environment almost 24/7, Monday to Friday, with me breaking it up in the mornings. So you've got to have a good deal of flexibility too, and play to your strengths. And
yes,
talk to
that is
people.
so brilliant, because how many couples, as you said, would be at their wit's end, but not able to express that. The other partner doesn't know, and therefore there could be tension within that too. So it's recognizing what that is, or if you're not too sure, get support and helping you to identify what that is, so that, as you said, you could play to your strengths. And communication is so important, and as is the community. And so I'm sure, reflecting back, the community that you had within, obviously, that you gained through the hospital environment, how important is it? And here's one of my questions I would love for you to share a bit more on. Sometimes family members and those close to you, they don't know how to be the best help, the best support. What sort of advice could you give to them, so that we don't step over the mark?
Okay, the most practical bit of help we got on day 2 was my oldest best friend, who had thought it was wonderful that at 41 I'd had this baby, because then she could have a baby to play with all over again, because there was this huge 16-year gap between children for me. She turned up at the hospital with plastic bags. She'd literally gone to the supermarket and to somewhere like Kmart and thought, what are practical things these guys may need in hospital and they don't have? And I can remember sitting in a gutter outside the Women's and Children's Hospital while our son was off having an initial MRI scan, and going through this bag like some vagrant in the gutter, and just grabbing a Snickers bar, it was just, and things like that can bring comfort. And she became our go-to person. She would go and water the pots. She would go and feed the dog and exercise the dog. It's practical help that families need. It's food in the freezer when they get home. We were in hospital for 6 weeks. And then all of a sudden we were discharged to home with this very sick child with a nasogastric feeding tube going over the top of his head and having to manage feeding him and his medications and everything else. And we came home and there was basic provisions in the house. It's those practical things. If I ended up with a cupboard full of things like, here are the carved wooden feet, carved by some Himalayan guru and blessed by him for your son. Here are the salts from some place in Ballarat that will heal your son. That sort of stuff isn't helpful. I learned just to accept it and say, thank you so much, and put it in the cupboard. Don't wish that you were in there. My mother used to say, I wish I could swap places with him. Well, you can't. That's not helpful. But just being there and listening. And that best friend of ours, she used to, whoever wasn't in hospital overnight with our son could leave the hospital at 9:00 at night, drive to their house. There was a meal for that person, because you're on your own at this stage, for that person, a glass of wine, a bit of television, and somebody just to talk to. And that was just an amazing support. Mind you, she cooked really well and I put on a whole heap of weight that I'm still trying to lose. But it's practical stuff that's helpful. So ask them what they need. How can I help? That's stuff.
Yeah. As you were sharing that, I recall someone mentioning that they did a bit of a roster and all of the practical things were there, and the family members and friends who wanted to support went to that list and said, I will do that pickup, I will cook that dinner, I will mow the lawn, all of those things, practical things that may have just been taken for granted, but was so super helpful because, as you mentioned, that was one less thing that you needed to worry about. And that's wonderful. So thank you so much, Judith, for sharing. I'm sure those who have listened, such as listening to Stephanie's, can't wait to read the full chapter to find out more of those insights. So thank you for sharing.
Happy to.
Philippa, on to you. Share a little bit more about who you are and what you're doing today and how that relates to your story.
Excuse me. Well, at the moment I am recovering. I'm not doing a lot of very much at all because I unfortunately got COVID in the middle of October last year and ended up in hospital and stayed there until the first week of January. So it was a very long stay and I got some very severe complications. And so I guess it's been difficult, but it relates back to my story in a way because, and similar to some things that Judith has said about the practical stuff, I'd already, having been through what I'd been through 7 years ago, I already had everything set up. So I had everything. I didn't have to worry when I was in hospital and off with the fairies for almost 6 weeks and not remembering it and couldn't tell you what day it was or anything else. All of the things about, I've got a teenage daughter, 16, she was looked after, the dogs were looked after. All of my financial stuff is all on automatic payments. And so what I went through years ago sort of set me up so that it wasn't such a big impact of being in hospital. It was tough on my family and it was hard, but, we kind of got through the other side and here I am again, but
life thought, let's bring those lessons to life. And I just want to share your chapter title, and then we'll share get you to share some insights that you hope people who read your chapter would take away. So your chapter title is The Marathon Within: A Journey of Transformation. So if someone is reading your chapter, Philippa, what would be some insights and learnings that you would love for her to take away from that?
Look, I think that you need to learn that you don't have to hold the world on your shoulders, that there are other people around. And I don't want to give too much away, but prior to 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago now, I was that person. I was that perfectionist. I did everything for everyone. I didn't say no. I survived on 4 hours sleep. And I felt that, saying no was a bad thing. And that, if I was to be a good friend, I always had to be there, or I always had to say yes. And to be the right, I'm a bookkeeper and BAS agent, so I always had to be on the phone when they rang, or on the other end of the email, or it was always that instant, thing. And I never stopped and I never relaxed. I had to be perfect, and I had to make sure that it was always perfect. And then, I got to a position where I couldn't do all those things. And, learned some really valuable lessons from it. But I guess that I didn't learn all of them. And, being in hospital for the last 3 months has just sort of resonated a few of those things, and, made me reflect on that I do sometimes still do those things, and that I sort of shouldn't, because, running a business is hard. And, I have wonderful staff, and they are absolutely amazing. And, they kept the business running while I was in hospital. But, there were some of those clients that wanted me and wanted my attention. And, when they couldn't get it because I was incapable of helping them, they went elsewhere, and that's okay. They can do that. They have that choice. And I've learned that I don't need to make a rod for my own back by being there. And, I have been out of hospital now for 3 weeks, and, I'm not answering emails every day. I'm checking my emails twice a week. And, if it's urgent, they'll ring me. And if I'm available to answer the phone, I will. And if it's not, well, they can wait. I don't have to answer it straight away. The world will not end because somebody didn't get their bookkeeping question answered.
The world keeps spinning.
It does. And we've got some wonderful clients who are, have been amazing, and I value them so highly, and they're grateful for the work that we do, and they're the kind of people I want to work with, and it's just been great.
Philippa, as you were sharing about, inability previously to say no, and you stretch yourself often thin because you wanted to be the rock for others, and to make sure, I think we all of us, even those who are listening, probably could really relate to that. And how important is it to look after yourself so that you're not stretching yourself too thin? I remember speaking to a guest years ago, and she was sharing the analogy that she heard, where there was a mother who said to her children, who were often asking her things all the time. She said, I just need some time out. She said, just think of mummy as a fruit bowl. And each time you take out a fruit, it gets empty, but you need to replenish that fruit. Well, when mummy says, I'm refilling my fruit bowl, that is when you need to give me some time to recruit and replenish, because I need to get my energy back so that I can support you. And so what a wonderful way to explain that to her children, but to others too, is just to say, and it's not that you're being rude or uncaring. It's that if you continue to stretch yourself too thin, and this is hopefully a great message for others who are listening, you're not going to be able to support people the best way, because you're just not running optimally yourself. So I would imagine now that you're very careful about every single moment that you have, especially the importance of rest. And that rest is actually so important. It should be on our to-do list, yes? That we need to give time to rest.
Absolutely. And it is really hard it is, and I still struggle with it. It's very hard to just rest, and especially when you've got that big to-do list with all those things on it that you need to get done. And sometimes you just have to say, no, I've got to go and lie down and have a nap, because I can keep trying to push through this to-do list, and I'm going to do substandard work and probably make a lot of mistakes, and it's going to take me 10 times as long as it would tomorrow after I've had a good sleep, or the next day.
I'm sure there's neuroscience that backs that up, that if you are tired and mentally exhausted and physically exhausted, it's going to take you a lot longer to do something and also make mistakes along the way too than if you are more alert. So those, I think they call them nana naps. Maybe we need to all put those on our to-do list. But
well,
even
I think it's a fantastic idea.
You do that. They have those pods, don't they, in their offices, that if someone needs to take a break and time out, they'll come back.
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Philippa, for sharing just a snippet of each of your chapters. If you want to be inspired and get a copy of this book so that you can read all of the remarkable stories, the best place to get a copy is businessinheels.net/dare-to-rise_book. So that's businessinheels.net/dare-to-rise_book. And grab your copy and buy another one and give it to some of your friends, because I know that each of your stories, you know, courage and inspiration and empowerment is so important in today's and resilience is so important, isn't it? Because life will often throw us curveballs, and so it's wonderful to learn and be inspired from each of your stories. So thank you all for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
Thank you for having us.